So one of my newly found interests is in game development and game design and how development teams are able to come up with their products. And this has basically led me to start to look very much closely into some of the video games that have come out in the past few years and what their success rates have been. And also in reading a little bit of literature written by some, people in the games journalist and games reporting aspect, it really gives you a window into how this development process is. Now, one very common theme is that game development is basically a juggernaut. It's something that hundreds of people try to do, and in many cases they are successful, and also in much more cases than the success, there are huge failures that are recognizable from years to come. Now, one of the really cool things about this is you get to understand kind of how they work with their pipelines. Even though they're very vague with their information, reporting is able to help you piece these, little bits together in order for you to form a full framework. So we're going to be looking at Cyberpunk 2077. We're going to be looking at Tom Clancy's The Division 2, and also games like Anthem, Mortal Kombat 11, Fortnite, and some of these games that have basically changed the landscape in their genres. And I'll probably try my best to bring this to a halt by pointing a finger as to why Tom Clancy's The Division 2 did not necessarily fulfill that greatness that it had within its potential, and why Cyberpunk 2077 is more than likely also in the place that it is just because of these common threads. So let's jump into the video and start off with game development from the side of game engines. As many of you know, a game engine is basically a core piece of software used to develop video games. It's used in conjunction with other tools that do 3D modeling, procedural generation, and all that stuff to put a game together in order for it to be published. Now, one of the really interesting threads is a lot of companies actually have their own in-house game engine or engines. In the case of Ubisoft, they actually do have multiple game engines that they use among their studios. Massive Entertainment is a daughter studio of them, and so they have the Snowdrop engine, and Ubisoft studios like Ubisoft Montreal have the Dunia engine in which they make the Far Cry games. And then if you look at EA has their Frostbite engine, CD Projekt Red has their own engine called the Red engine, and a company that developed Metro Exodus, I think 4A Games, also has their own engine called the 4A engine. In the case of Crytek, who is the developer of the game Crysis, they have the engine called the Crytek engine, and that engine's also been used to develop another really huge landmark game, Rise the Son of Rome. So a beautiful looking game that was also done with the Cry engine. And you guys know the common joke in the gaming community: can it run Crysis, or can it run Crysis 3? And this is something that, if you're looking at the way these games have been developed in the past, their game engines have basically been the dictator of a lot of things: how the game looks, how the game runs, how the community basically picks on and understands the way the framework of these games are. So looking at Cyberpunk 2077, one big question that a lot of people have been asking is, what have the developers been doing all these years that they were able to bring out a game and then the console versions of the game were broken? I think I have a hypothesis to lay forward to that question, and I think it's more than likely accurate. So on talking with a few buddies of mine on Discord just the other night, we came up with the conclusion that I think a lot of these gaming development companies are stretching themselves too thin. And one of the reasons for that is because they develop their own in-game engines, and when you have your own engine, you actually have to support that engine and constantly stay in touch with making sure the engine continues to function properly. And that means you're going to have a team of developers and a team of programmers dedicated to making that engine work and support your own team of developers making your game. And I remember in an article that I read, one of the heads at CD Projekt Red said they could not develop Cyberpunk 2077 on the old Red engine. They had to basically restructure that engine in order for them to have it develop and do what they wanted it to do in Cyberpunk 2077. I think this process must have taken a little bit of the development time, unlike if they had perhaps used another engine that belonged to another company that has a dedicated team that works on these engines. And this is basically what I think makes games very successful: time management and the way development teams are able to use their time. Another anecdote that I can say most likely points to this same problem is an article that was actually written by Screen Rant. They cited Kotaku in saying that Anthem's biggest problems may have been the Frostbite engine. The Frostbite engine is EA's own in-house proprietary engine, and actually it's not a bad engine, but it's actually an engine that challenges developers when they're trying to make make anything other than a first-person shooter. So that's why your Battlefield 1, Battlefield 5 games are actually decent and well-made games. But then a game like Anthem actually did struggle, and even in the discussions about the canceled Star Wars game that EA was actually working on under Motive Studios also faced a lot of challenges, because this engine is an engine that had some complications in order to develop your video game if it wasn't a first-person shooter. Also, other problems have been cited about just the communication distance. The company that actually does and supports this Frostbite engine is actually, or at that time that the engine was first developed, was EA's DICE, which was actually located in Europe. And a lot of teams in the Western Hemisphere here in North America's had a lot of issues trying to reach, that company or that development studio to gain support because of the time difference and just because of a whole lot of other logistical issues. So that's where I think some of the issues have crept into the EA Games publication, because I remember Frostbite engine not being a very friendly engine with the FIFA franchise. And I think around FIFA 17, FIFA 18, there were a little bit of issues that crept into the game, and a lot of the gamers in that community were not necessarily fond of it. And then we can move again into another studio that developed its own in-house engine, and how that engine basically challenged its own game release, but they were able to come out unscathed. And this is 4A Games. Metro Exodus was a very good game, quite a phenomenal game, but I remember that game had some technical issues on release. To add on top of the way that the company went ahead and changed its policy to go on the Epic Games Store for a limited time, it was a little weird for the gaming community. But then at the same time, for those of us who got the game on the Epic Games Store, I remember trying to run this game and the game was having a lot of issues. Thankfully, I had a secondary rig where I had to do a lot of jerry rigging to get this game to work. And I understand the constraints, I can get it. Developing a game engine is a big, huge feat on its own. But sometimes I think it's wise to take the approach that a gaming company like Respawn took. Respawn is also a daughter studio of EA, and they released Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order in 2019. And the game actually came out to a lot of acclaimed praise. And I think one of the reasons of their success was on offloading a lot of the development tasks to another studio to use their game engine, where the other studio or the other company supports that engine. They're able to focus on their game. And massive Ubisoft is most likely going to be struggling with the very same thing. Now, it's too late in their development processes to go back, and so it might be profitable for them to actually take an arm of their entire business and dedicate that entire arm to just supporting that engine, and maybe even start coming up with a profit model with that engine that actually makes it work. Now, what do I mean? So on chatting with the guys yesterday, one of our, business-minded guys, Doc G, said one of the biggest problems that you face in a business is whenever you try to add to your business or make it more complex, you're most likely at risk of killing that business. And in making your game engine, supporting your game engine, and developing your own video games, that basically adds different layers of complexity to your business model. And so in massive Ubisoft right now, as we're speaking, we know that Avatar is being developed on the Snowdrop engine. So if anything, at the bare minimum, Massive is running two business models. Now, if the rumors are true, The Division 3 is also being developed as well. So you have a company that's most likely developing two video games and running an entire game engine, which is the foundation and the framework on which these games are going to be built. And at this point, they most likely have in-house developers that are actually supporting that engine. And I don't know if there's enough staff or if this is most likely going to stretch the staff thin, not to even bring in the third layer, which is there is a team currently supporting the Division 2, though it may be a small team. When you stretch all of this out, how can you put the full force of your team on a project that needs to be completed? I think something's got to give at some point, and this is where we start to see the little kinks in many of these games as they come out. Many people might say, well, it's because RPG looter shooters and blah, 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 but I don't think that's always the case, because you can do an RPG looter shooter and do it very well. It's not necessarily a big complication. I mean, look at Bungie. Their entire team is dedicated just to one game, and they're not developing, or nor do we know about them developing anything else. And so if they take that model and focus on one game, then they can bring that game out and make it better. Not saying that the Destiny 2 doesn't have its issues, but less likely are you going to see the issues that are creeping up in the Division and games like Cyberpunk 2077 show their faces resources in Bungie's game Destiny 2. That's because the focus is a lot more defined in those cases. And in Jedi Fallen Order, they went ahead to use the Unreal Engine 4 to develop their game. Now, what's so special about using another, game engine? Well, think about it. Epic Games basically manages that engine and monetizes that engine. That engine brings in a good source of their revenue. They also manage one particular game, which is Fortnite. So their focus is also really defined. In fact, before Fortnite, they'd always worked on that engine. So they had an entire business model based on making sure that engine was the best possible engine that anybody could use at the time that they wanted to use it. Fortnite just happened to be something. Once they started putting it in testing, they saw an opportunity, and basically they were able to break open, a huge monetary platform with it. And a lot of the money that they make from Fortnite, guess where that money goes? It goes into the development of their engine, which they're able to give you for free until you make your sales up to $1 million. And then you start to pay them 4%. CryEngine is also another one that's there. And Unity is also another company that does, support their engine by themselves. I think if game developers are able to take that risk and say, okay, at the long run, it seems like it will be a little bit, cheaper if we had our in-house engine. But on the short term, what are we trying to do? Knowing your own scope and capacity is very important. CD Projekt Red has grown a good company, a good-sized company, on the back of only like 3 franchises: The Witcher, Gwent, and Cyberpunk. That's basically it. Ubisoft has been doing games and have a bigger gallery than, CD Projekt Red. But because Ubisoft pumps out more games, it might be much more profitable for them to do so and even monetize their engine. I think Ubisoft needs to start exploring the possibility of making the Snowdrop engine available for people to be able to use on a profit-sharing model. Now, that's very hard for a company like them to do because they're very secretive, they're very on the inside. But it is not out of the question. Epic Games is making a killing, a bank from doing this model. So why not Ubisoft do it, so that if that model is successful for other developers who may want to use some of their really cool engines, then they have a profit sharing model with them, and those companies are able to bring in more revenue for them. This is a business strategy that I'm sure they may have considered, but also maybe shut down. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to be really successful at it and do it very well in order for other people to kind of take notice. And I think Epic Games and Team Sweeney are basically going to change and revolutionize the industry with the way they're actually getting their engine to be a very solid taker. And I will not be shocked if the next Star Wars game being worked on by Respawn, rumors, is done on the Unreal Engine as well. If you look at Warner Brothers, a lot of their games, Mortal Kombat 11, the Arkham games, these were also done on Unreal Engine as well. And, I don't think it's out of the question for companies even like Bethesda to adopt this practice, because they've also faced a lot of challenges with some of their games looking very ancient because they're using their own proprietary creation engine. And now they have more, financial backing because they've been acquired by Microsoft. I think they can actually take the time for them to be able to go ahead and, make that engine a better product and then start to build upon it. And then the final layer of this is looking at companies like, Microsoft and Sony. These are publishers and also developers and manufacturers of gaming consoles. So a company like Sony, it makes a lot of sense for them to have a game engine that is very, very unique to them, that they own the IP and they own the rights to, and it's an in-house game engine. But what we've seen is a lot of these engines actually do such a very good job. Look at Ghost of Tsushima, look at God of War, look at The Last of Us. These games were made on proprietary Sony development engines. And one of the really cool things is many of these games, yes, they are exclusive to PlayStation. They come out looking really good, performing really well. And this is something that you want for your games to do. You want for them to come out in the best possible area. It's one thing to criticize your game of not being interesting, but it's a whole nother thing to criticize your game for being a broken piece of software. And I think CD Projekt Red is going to have to walk through this mire, because restructuring their business model might be where they need to go. And I'm sure that massive Ubisoft has walked through these issues, and I'm sure they're going to be dedicating and using their resources much more wisely. But I think there's a second layer of them to be able to leverage this, and that is by mostly opening the doors for other people to be able to come in and use their, their software, but for a particular fee, or they use a sharing model where they can earn royalties, just like Epic Games and Crytek and Unity are doing. Anyways, this is pretty much my video. It may have been a little heady and a little longer, but I really wanted to share this with you guys because I feel like game development is something that gamers, at the point where we reach this age in our gaming journey, we need to be very well versed with what it is that we do, our entertainment, source. Because if you look at movies, if you look at TV shows, many of us are also versed in their production, in their direction, and all of that stuff. Why not, educate ourselves on topics like these? So thank you very much for watching the video. I appreciate you guys' time and audience. If you were driving, I appreciate your patience. If you were just maybe listening or whatever, thank you so much. If you enjoy the content, you can subscribe, you can hit like, you can comment, whatever it is. Hopefully we'll see in another video. Peace.